Well, Augusta, welcome to take two of the interview on Therapy for Dads with you. For those that don't know, we attempted this last week, and this wonderful video platform, which has been wonderful for the most part, last week was a lot of glitches, and we decided to call it a morning and reset. So welcome to take two, Augusta. How you doing?
I'm doing outstanding, brother. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this outstanding platform for working today.
Absolutely. I know.
Thank you.
It's a difference. It's a difference. So
Absolutely.
And let us get to know you a bit. Where are you calling in from?
I'm currently calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, but am born and raised throughout a multitude of areas in Los Angeles, everywhere from Compton, Watts, San Pedro, Long Beach. If there was some kind of city touching Los Angeles or surrounding area, I've lived there.
Okay, so birth till about when that you decided to leave the LA area?
Birth until, leaving the state of California at 35 years old, being like, I'm going to pick up and go to Georgia, but still was relatively in the California area. Worked law enforcement for 5.5 years out in the middle of nowhere of Kern County. And also, lived for the most part when I was in my first marriage in the Riverside County area, mostly Corona, Paris, Moreno Valley. So still close to LA, but not quite, picking up and, selling everything and moving to Atlanta.
Yeah, that's a significant move, going from kind of an LA, Southern California guy, raised, born, did life, to Georgia. I mean, that's...
Yes, very, very, I wouldn't say opposites, more similarities, as you of course know, growing, living life, more similarities than you think, but where there are differences, they are quite different. They are quite different.
What are the two big differences that you've noticed being in Georgia versus Southern California?
One of the things I've seen is, like everywhere else in metropolitan cities, people tend to complain about traffic, and I don't interrupt them. I just listen, and I'll sip my coffee, and I kind of, get moments of peace, because I have flashbacks of PTSD of the 405, and the 5 freeway, or the 110 on a Thursday at 3 p.m. So traffic here really not as bad. And I think the other thing is it's not really a forced hospitality here. I think the people here, regardless of their race, color, creed, wealth status, everyone for the most part is 99% genuinely welcoming. You can't walk past someone without somebody, hey, good morning, good afternoon, hey man, you have a good night. So it's a really comfortable feeling when, in California, we know everyone's in a rush. So the hustle and bustle, naturally, people, at times we forget to take that half a second just to show someone gratitude, say thank you, or give them a basic salutation like good morning.
It sounds that those two sound nice to me, the less traffic, and I could relate a little bit. I lived in Riverside, Corona area for a little bit, and drove that, the dreaded 91 freeway for a couple of years, and that was awful. But never.
Yes.
It's, for those that are not from California, LA traffic is pretty horrible.
It's pretty. It's saddening.
To go north in Northern California, we have to go through LA. So there's been times that I avoid it and go around up to the 210. Let's just avoid it. Maybe longer, but I don't have to sit in traffic. At least I'm moving. I'd rather move than be like.
I mean, yeah, for the people who are listening who don't understand that, the 210 would seem completely out of the way from taking the straight line through Los Angeles to hit the grapevine to go up north. But you're you're literally on a shorter trip going all the way around, which doesn't make sense. But as someone who's done it, it totally makes sense.
Yes, it's your blood level, your heart rate, your everything just kind of stays. It's choosing a more mindful, therapeutic approach, as I would say, versus you're putting yourself into a stressful situation. You know what you're doing.
Adding children in the backseat to that. Protect your mental health. Take the 210.
Yes, I love that. Hashtag protect your mental health.
Protect your mental health.
Yeah, when you have kids back there, it's no. You do not do that. If anyone does get a chance, if you're not from California, just come out and just experience it. It's worth the experience at least one time, just to know. And then you could really be thankful for the freeways that you guys have, like Georgia or anywhere else. And what time is it for you there this morning?
It is currently 8:08 a.m.
Nice. And it's 5:08 over here. So Those that have been listening know that I have actually been meeting some wonderful men across the US, across the globe, and we find as fathers times of the day to do recordings with kids and trying to balance this. And so it's always fun to figure out what time of the day it is for the different guests that come on and what time I'm recording at. It's either early morning for me or super late at the night to kind of balance time zones here.
Specifically the Brits. Specifically the Brits, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, specifically the
Yes.
Brits. Yeah. So Augusta, can you tell us a little bit more about your family, dad journey, kind of?
My dad journey is not to necessarily say, for those of you who are listening, if you don't necessarily see this visually and you possibly don't like hear it in the tone, like I'll deliver a lot of jokes in this, but I am Black, if you can't necessarily hear or tell. So not to say that my life or my upbringing has mirrored that of a lot of other, Black men who come with, the single mother story and all of that. Like that's common, but not as much common as people think. For me, my mother and father were married. My father was not the greatest of human being. I'll get to him shortly after this, but my mother met, to this day, the person who I always get emotional talking about it, the greatest man I've ever met walking this earth, and my stepfather who raised me, the man who taught me how to frame a window, how to fix a toilet, how to change oil, rotate a tire. Outstanding man, Navy man, go Navy, who y'all shipmates. Met my stepfather. They've been together for 20, this year I believe it was 24 years. Next year I believe it'll be 25 years.
Wow.
So I have that quarter in. And we grew up all throughout Los Angeles. And because I saw, the way that I was raised, I naturally just I wanted to be better than my birth dad. So I said, whenever I had children, I wanted to be there. I wanted to be present. I wanted to be active. My stepfather, he did, as we affectionately refer to him as Pops, he did all of that. He didn't miss a game. He didn't miss practice. Despite him owning a business and working as a longshoreman for 20 plus years, he always made the time. Every other weekend there was a trip. There was something, it was always a connection. It was always a bond. One of the things that assisted me on my dad's journey was right before my first, I would say obtaining my first child. I had a conversation with my birth dad, and I was around 22 years old, and I was able to ask him why he left, what it was. And I think this is also what got me into mental health. It was very therapeutic for me to have a real conversation with the man who seed helped bring me into the world, because a lot of times people don't. It's an uncomfortable convo. And me and him had that talk, and after that, we've had a better relationship. And shortly after that, I was introduced to my dad journey. I met my former wife. She had a 3-month-old daughter. I adopted my 3-month-old daughter. The only man she's known her entire life is me. Very fitting. I always felt it was God's timing. I always said I would give my father who raised me, I said I would name my daughter, I would give her my stepfather's middle name. Oddly enough, my daughter's middle name was my stepfather's middle name. So it was like, perfect. So from there, had 3 more children. Life happens. It comes at you fast. Adults make mistakes. But as I tell people, you've got to work in fatherhood regardless. You have to be a dad regardless. The difficulties, the work, all of that. So in that portion of my dad journey, now I have 4 children that I talk to every day via FaceTime, phone call, something. School starts back this coming week. So it's going to be me at probably around 10:30 p.m. here doing FaceTime homework sessions to assist with tutoring with math and English. So that's that. I'm currently with my soon-to-be wife. We have a 2-year-old, soon-to-be 3-year-old, who is very much similar to my second oldest daughter. They are almost identical in their actions and attitude. And both of the respective mothers look back at me and say common denominator. So my dad journey it's been a whirlwind, from marriage and divorce and learning how to recover from divorce and still being a father and pushing through those difficulties. But I tell people regularly, I would not trade any of this for anything, because I feel like every position I've been in, it's allowed me to be a blessing to somebody who's somewhat in that situation. And I don't just tell them from pulling something out of the sky. I could speak to them from the standpoint of a testimony as experience and give them, the guidance that at times really men and dads don't get.
Well, I'd love to kind of go through a little, slow it down on a couple sections that you just shared about. But quick pause, because I have to go quickly tuck my son in. Those that notice the cut and splice and film, again, real life dad tucking son back in.
Fatherhood calls. It never. The life of a father never stops. Duty calls all day, every day.
Duty does. It's 24/7. Just like with moms, man. It's you gotta do what you gotta do. And I'm trying to let the wife sleep too. So as I'm recording, so if I hear a peep, if I hear a sound, I go in and tuck them in. And
husband of the year, sir. Husband of the year.
I appreciate that. So yeah, I guess so. With your couple areas to hone in on and focus would be a little bit of that kind of dadding, and what your. I'd love to hear more about your stepdad and kind of the role model. It sounds like he was a powerfully positive man and role model for you as a child, as a teen, and whenever he came in your life. Because it sounds like you said mom and him they're going to be the 25 years. So if I do the math right, he came in a little, when I guess
he came in. I was just at 10 years old. So I think when I say his getting that therapeutic conversation from my birth dad, being raised by my stepfather. Oddly enough, for people who know me, they know my pops and my dad actually were both longshoremen. They worked together often, regularly, past each other regularly. Never any animosity, never any issues. My pops actually told me, he said, man, there was one time where I thought we were going to, he's older, he said, I thought we were going to come to blows. And I'm like, come, what? Come to blows? Can you explain that? He's like, I thought we were going to fight. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't understand your old man jargon. But he said, your dad came over and he said, man, I appreciate what you're doing for my son and my daughter. Mm-hmm. And to this day, like when I tell people, they're thrown off because they're like, oh man, they didn't fight. They didn't war. I said, no, man. My pops was very much an adult. He just was like, I'm not going to fight over something. Like, this is still, he never said an ill word or any issues. And seeing that is really guided me to see somebody who was, I don't have to get in a confrontation if I don't have to be negative. I could be positive. I don't have to have beef with other men. I could love my son. I could tell my son I love him, even though at times with him it was still very difficult because, he's from that era where, I always speak from the perspective as, a black man who's a father. He grew up in an era where black men weren't really hugging their kids. It was like a push because you had to be hard. You got to be tough. You got to be the breadwinner. So I think watching him and then somewhat adapting some of his styles was has assisted me to be the father I am today. And I think also seeing him, at my events, and concerts and whatever it was, that was another reason why I took, somewhat the path that I took. He would be at my events and I would see so many young men who looked like me, whose mothers were there as their agent or their representative. And here was my mother and father. And in some cases, it was my mother, my father, and my birth dad all together.
Oh, wow.
And, in pictures, supportive, non-confrontational. And I look back at those days and said, somebody's got to be able to intervene because, when it does happen, when there's not the father in the home, as someone who's seen it firsthand as a civilian and working in law enforcement, and I know it just isn't good. It just is not good.
Yeah. You mentioned that earlier, that as you're introducing yourself, that stereotype, that typical, saying as a black man, you would think that I wouldn't have a dad, right? You're speaking to something, right, I guess, within your cultural community is more prevalent or has been. But then having a father and being able to, and kind of the benefit of your stepfather who was there, and then your dad who would come and having these conversations, is having to, and you mentioned that image of you at a game and having all three there supporting you, not just mom. Right. And not that that's bad, but you saw a difference. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to a bit about that of okay, you grew up with a father, but I'm sure had friends that didn't. And I'm just wondering, especially coming from the African-American community, the differences of having a dad around and the impact of that on you as a man, then and now. And
absolutely. The best way for me to describe that is there's a picture of me, in California, you don't graduate from elementary school, you promote. They wanted to throw that term on there, you're promoting to junior high school. And in the picture is me, and through elementary school, I had 7 really close friends. 2 I still talk to, 1 at least twice a month. He just had his first child. And the other I talk to twice a year. He lives in Northern California and is in medical school. The other 4 who are in this one picture, 1 is serving a life sentence for the most heinous of of taking a life. The other is serving, I believe, 20 years for a robbery that ended in injury. The other is in and out of jail every month. And the other is constantly ducking the law. My kids, my oldest daughter saw this picture once and she asked me, Dad, who are these people? And she asked me while, my parents were visiting our home at the time when I was married. And I looked at my mother and I looked at my father and I broke down in tears because I'd realized the only difference between me and them was when I went home, not to, say like my mother wasn't an outstanding woman. She's the best. There's none can compare all of that good stuff you say about your mom. But I had a male voice in the house, someone who I could bounce questions off of, someone who understood me as a man and would be like, hey, Pops, I'm thinking about doing this. And someone to be like these, who was honest enough to be like, man, there's consequences with those actions, son. You don't want to do this. You don't gotta fit in. You could be you. People still appreciate you. His big thing. Be your own man. Be of character. All of that. So I didn't necessarily go the route of other people. And I keep that picture. I keep it because it's the reminder of like, I'll look at that picture and will randomly call my father. Hey, Pops, what you doing? Nothing. Just want to say I appreciate you and love you, man. Love you too, son, because I'm like, I understood that was the only difference. We all lived in the same neighborhood. None of us, were rich. None of us were, exactly poor or impoverished, but none of us were rich. We were all one paycheck from being homeless. All of us at one time were on welfare, some form of government assistance. But the difference was when my father came in, he elevated our lives. Even though we were in the same areas, when you came into our home, those same people would visit my house regularly. And they knew the difference. Like they were asking my dad questions. They were asking my mom, could she help them with things? Because I had this really awesome 2-parent household. And like I said, there's nothing wrong if you're in, the single mother or single father and you're doing the best you can. But for me, as someone who grew up in the 2-parent household, I know like it is specifically in this community, it is night and day with respect to the growth and the progress and the opportunities you present for a child. Because just moving that one voice from the home, man, it is a game changer in all of the wrong ways.
Wow. And the buddies that would come over when you were younger, was that like a conversation? Did they ever say, I like coming, you got your dad, was that kind of an awareness of, hey, I like this house? I mean, we gravitated towards your home because of that, or was that not actually an awareness?
I believe one of them who I said is constantly ducking the law. He still sees my mother when she visits California, and they ran an event 2 years ago, and he had some people with him. I'd shown up fresh off of work. So, I had a uniform and a gun and a badge and everything in the car. And I'm talking to a buddy who I know from LAPD. And there's these 3 dudes who look kind of off. And I'm watching and, being a cop surveying the area. And there's a 4th dude, and the 4th dude walks over and the 3 dudes come over really tough. And the 4th dude is my buddy who I've known since preschool, kindergarten. Oh, man. And it's all love. And it's, man, how you doing? And he sees my mother, and he hadn't seen my mother. He'd been away on vacation, as we say. And he'd been away on vacation for about 4 years, and he just runs and he hugs and he picks up my mother, and he's, oh man. And these dudes are like, who is that, your mom, your aunt? He's like, man, this lady, when my mom was strung out on drugs, it was this and that. And like, he understood as a kid what it was. Even now to this day, like there's, anything that would happen when my parents were out of town or this, he would, hey, look, Ma, if you need anything, let me know. If you have any problems, if there's this, please just let me know. Because he understood at a young age, like the spirit and the attitude in this house is very different from the one I go home to. There's like peace in this house. He would see my mother cooking. He, friends who would come by to visit would see, okay, well, is your dad home? No, he's at work. Oh, you have a dad and he works? And there was an inherent difference that was clear. It was explicit. It wasn't like, maybe. No, it was clear. Like, okay, wow. In this house, there's something different about this house. And I always wanted that for my children because I saw both sides. I had the close friends who did not have really that structure and that foundation. Like I said, not to say you can't get it from, the single mother or the single father, but everyone who's a parent knows, if whether you're married, dating, or co-parenting, everyone who understands in this like parenting journey, you're not going to be able to give everything to that kid. You need that other person to kind of give the feedback and the guidance, etc.
Yeah. Single parents, quick comment on that. I honestly don't know how people do that, if I'm honest. So I say props to any parent any single mom, single dad trying to raise children. It's on top of it's a lot of work being a parent.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it's fantabulous, not even a word, amazing single parents out there that are doing the best.
I'm using fantabulous this week. I'm using that.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. It's probably early morning brain. Fantabulous that are doing amazing jobs, doing their best to provide for their children. Going back to your story and the area you grew up in and within your community, seeing there is a difference, and your friends, other buddies that didn't have that environment gravitated toward your home. You said there was a peace in the air. It was a different feel knowing, you said it yourself. Oh, you have a dad and he works. So it's like this immediate awareness of, oh my gosh, and your mom's cooking in home and not strung out. And so there was a whole thing going on, that it wasn't just having a dad in the home and a mom, but also who they were as people, right?
Right.
Because I'm sure you had friends, maybe not, you can speak to this, maybe you had that two-parent home that maybe it wasn't the best environment, and that's still...
Oh, yeah. Right? There were a lot of people who, I think that's where there's and I said I'll save that a topic for another day, but I think there's, even back then and for now, I think people push for so much. Like, we just finished reading the book Marriage Goals by Pastor Michael Todd, and it's a great book, and everyone uses hashtag marriage goals, and I'm like, marriage should be the goal. I'm like, but the problem I think is even back then with those couples, everyone was so big on marriage. It was like, you don't even have just a general healthy relationship. Like, you have a marriage for the sake of having a marriage, and it's like, you just need a healthy relationship. Like, what you can't have one. Well, you can have one without the other, but it's not going to be a good product. You're just doing it to say we're married. And I'm like, that's affecting your kids. That goes back to the therapy thing of like, now you're in this marriage where your children see you and they're like, well, I have a mom and a dad and they live in the same home. Okay, but is there chaos or is there peace? Do your parents pour into each other? Are they both on E to where they can't pour into each other, and then you're on E because they can't pour into you? Like, there's no affirmations, there's no love, there's no extensions of it, none of that in the crib. So it's like, now, you have the two parents in the household, but where's their character? Where does their love lie, their faith, all of those things? So yeah, I saw that growing up. I had a couple of people who they grew up in households where they had both parents, but you just felt it when you visited. Like, this isn't the same. Like, even as we might have been 12, 13, and we were cognizant of the fact your parents are married, but they're really not. Like, they're kind of roommates.
You could sense it. It's a felt sense. You walk in the room, and you're like, oh yeah, the tension.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And I've definitely had that, for sure, experience of walking into homes and knowing, oh, this is different than some other homes I've been in, and it's true. It's like, even as a kid, you may not always have language for it, right, when you're younger, but I call it that felt sense. You walk in and you're like, you could sense it in your body, and you're like, oh yeah, this is different. I don't know if I want to come back here as much.
Yeah, it's going to be a one-time visit, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. Nice to meet you folks, but I'm not coming back. Going back again to the dad and having him, and obviously your parents had, like you said, there was a good relationship, good marriage. They were present. It wasn't just that they were roommates, but they worked on their relationship, and you felt it.
Right.
And going back to your stepdad, who you call Pops, right? Is that?
Yes.
Looking back now, what are like 2 or 3 things that his influence on you and how it impacted you as a dad today? Like, looking at who he was, his character as a man, as your stepfather. What are like 2 or 3 things that you're like, yeah, this is really what helped shape me, that I know that if I didn't have, like you kind of hinted at earlier, maybe I would have probably taken a different path. But, I'm just curious if you can put it into like 2 or 3 things of like, this is what that fatherly role figure meant for me and how it impacted me. I wonder if you kind of speak to that.
Right. The first I could say is duty. the first thing he taught me, I think, was seeing him was duty. In ethics, they talk about, I think it's Immanuel Kant, Kantian ethics. And Kant believed in duty. Like, that was his whole deal. Like, you do it because of duty. You do it out of, well, there's no. Like, you're morally obligated to do this. So I think primarily with him, and even conversations with him in the past couple of years, the past couple of months, like, hey, why did you do this? He was like, it was my job. Like, it was my job, man. Like, I was your father. Like, hey, man, why did you take us here or do this? Because I had to. But then every time where he was like, there was this duty, he was like, it wasn't just because I had to. Of course I had to, because I was your father, because I wasn't going to neglect you. But I also did it. He said, when I would question my duty, I realized it wasn't just duty. I wanted to. There was a passion. There was a love there. So I think with him, it was, just the spirit of want to. And I believe the other thing that I learned from him was just presence. And it'll seem, wow, presence over presence, CE over TS, like the ability to be there, whether by phone call, video, trips, vacations, homework, your presence there in your child's life, it's gonna outweigh anything of dollar amount ever. I could say when we were growing up, we got, gifts. Like I said, Pops was very different. I think, like, for my 12th birthday, I really wanted like a PlayStation, or I can't even remember. It might have been the first PlayStation or second PlayStation. I really wanted that. Ask me what I got instead.
What did you get instead?
A toolbox, a 32-piece socket set, a monkey wrench, a number of tools. And he said, you show me a man with no tools, I'll show you a man with no hands. And I didn't get it. Then I, was sitting up on a roof one day, and I'm working on a roof, and I'm like hanging a door, and I said, man with no tools, a man with no hands. And I realized, like, that physical presence, why he bought me that, and he got my sister something, for like track, because she was interested in running. Like, our birth dad was like, I'm going to send this money in this, but we hadn't seen him in 2 years. And I realized, like, I feel like you said, that felt feeling as a kid, man, I really appreciate more this time than I do this dollar, because that dollar is really meaningless. It's, the shoes are going to get small, the shirt's going to shrink, that food's going to get eaten. But that time where you were just in the park and we just ran around aimlessly, like throwing a football for 2 hours, man, I'm never going to forget that.
Yeah.
So I took that from him and was like, I really want to emphasize time with my kids. And I think as fathers, we're so stuck on, I got to provide, I got to do this, that, I'll make the time when I can, forgetting, like, look, man, like as you said, team member of the Goodman mob coming up, third one. And it's like, that time just goes. And I'm like, as much as I want to spend money and pour this, man, I'd much rather be like, hey, let's just sit on the phone for an hour and just talk. Like, dad's 7 states away. Hey, dad's here for a week. I just want to spend 4 days. We don't even have to go anywhere. We could just hang at a hotel and eat popcorn but it's like really valuing time. Time and duty were like the 2 biggest things I got from him.
Wow. It really does sound like it has significantly impacted you. And you knew it as a kid of what you really wanted, is that I really wanted that intentional, present father, not just the one who dropped money off, right? But, and not that wasn't helpful or bad, but it was a different investment of, it was relational, more relational. I may forget the shoes, but we're playing ball, and that's something I'm always going to cherish, is doing this because you took the time to be with me, to hang out, and there's that relational equity of investment, and then feeling that, knowing, okay, that it's not just duties for duty's sake, but it's duty kind of after the fact of being present and having relationship. It was like relationship and then duty on top of that, and almost like he could speak to duty and model it because of the relational equity versus just duty, and there's nothing in between. It's like this big gap. Is that kind of
That's absolutely
what you would say? With that, with the dad, and you could be speaking from, I know, your experience, which is not everyone's experience, but at least from your experience with those buddies, the 4 that you said that went off and made some different choices versus the other buddies that had dads, and you saw them where they went, and you saw the significant impact on the lives of these friends who had a home that was more intact. And, you hear that said, like the fatherless in the African American community, it's a big deal. It's a big epidemic. Can you speak to today? Is that as true? Is it improving? Is it getting better where that narrative has been shifting? Is it like, what is the reality now? Is that something you can speak to?
I think the narrative is still there because it's difficult. It's difficult to break. Like
Okay.
the best example I could give you is, you're from California, so
Mhm.
you've lived throughout California. You've heard all the different stories of, Compton, when people reference
Mhm.
Compton and
Mhm.
people's reactions, like,
You
yeah,
have an
and they
immediate
think,
reference. Yeah. Yeah.
it is Ice Cube videos, it is,
Yep.
the old door knocking.
Mhm.
And I tell people, I'm like, and I'll always ask, well, have you ever been to Compton? No. I'm like, it's like white brothers walking around with buns and like Birkenstock with poodles. There's a Starbucks, a lot of different places. I'm like, it is not what you think it is. Like, there's
Yeah.
still some elements. I'm like, but it's just like every other city.
Yeah.
It's adjacent to a metropolitan. It is gentrified up. I'm like, so it's not that. So I say the
Mm.
same thing about, with respect to when people talk, like black fathers in the home. I ask them, like, how many black married couples do you know? How many black
Mm.
fathers do you know? Well,
Right.
I don't know that many. Well, I know, this many. Okay, is he married? Well, no. Does he co-parent? With that person. No, they live together. They're together. They're just not married. And even with respect to that, like, that's one of the things that when people look at the stats, they go, well, they're still not. And I'm like, well, if you look at the CDC's numbers, the thing that they always discount is, there's there are none in the home. No, I mean, we're just not, folks just aren't getting married. Like, most of the black fathers who I know are like cohabitating with, like their old lady. And I'm like, hey, bro, y'all gonna get married? I mean, one day. Like, your son's 17, dog. Just pull the trigger.
Hmm.
Like, it's been one day for almost 2 decades. I'm like, no, like, statistically, they're more present. They're co-parenting, all of that. But it's going to take a lot to destroy the narrative. But there's,
Mm.
that's why I was like, I want to, I was like, yeah, that's why I'm here, to kind of crush that narrative, for, the fathers who, are, I tell people, when you listen to my podcast or you support it, I don't care if you're a husband, a spouse, a boyfriend, a divorcee, everybody from husband to baby daddy. I'm trying to help you to be the best possible father you could be. But there's far more black fathers active, but I think we just don't hear it often because
Mm.
it's immediate thing. It's what's the old saying from like the guy from the Chicago Tribune, and where he coined the term in like 79 or 78, if it bleeds, it leads. It's not a cool story, if it's, hey, some dad, started like a baseball league. It's not. That doesn't
Mm.
sell as much as, like, sadly, like the sad story. So,
Yeah.
until, news wants to start doing still, more awesome think pieces, or, hey, here's a black dad who started like a library club, the narrative will continue.
Yeah, which is, I find that truly sad, and that's what sells. And unfortunately, it's these narratives. And so it's sad to me that we don't hear more about the change, because you still hear that. Like you said, growing up, you hear Compton and you think you have that image, right? Because you've never been there,
Right.
or having, how many African American couples do you know? And because we go by, one person or something we see on the TV, it's like, oh,
Right.
this must be a thing. And
And that becomes the whole,
that
and
becomes the whole
yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
And you did say that there is still not an issue, I guess an issue. I don't know what your word you would use, but there's still a need for growth, and the
Absolutely.
narrative needs to change, and that your part of your heart is to do that, right? And you kind of plugged it quickly, but could you quickly plug the work you're doing?
Yeah. So, Augusta Foster, that's my government. You'll probably Google me. You'll find all my tax information, my mortgage info, all that, because it's public record. um, but yeah, that's like my Instagram. So, like, I'd really, as a side note, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, like, if the woman who you're dating, like, I will make this very quick for you. If this woman pours into you, she invests into you emotionally, all of these things, and she uplifts you, and she's there for you in your times of down, and this woman is like actively praying for you, man, lock that thing down. Lock it down. Really, it was my soon to be wife who, we were just having a conversation, and she's lived across the table. She was like, you should write a book. I was like, why? She was like, you always talk about, like, black dads who don't get this, and you talk about like divorced dads who don't get this. She was like, you talk about mental health. She was like, you know how many black male therapists I know? Not that many. She was like, you know how many books on divorce and like real things I know? Like, not that many that were like giving like specifics. She was like, write a book, do something with your time. And I was like, oh, okay, sweetie, like, thank you. And from there, like, it was really cathartic. Like, I wrote like 2 short ebooks. I started
Mm,
doing the podcast, and I was like, yeah, like, this is a level of therapy for me. I got active with, a different group of therapy groups and B groups. And if you're listening to this and you happen to be, one of Travis's 8,000 African American listeners, please check out Black Men Health. Great group, all of that. Yeah. So it was like, for me, that was big. So I was like, yeah, man, I was like, this is a need to be filled. And, I've sold some books, done some, like, sessions with people, not even from the standpoint of just counseling, but like random people calling me on Instagram Live being like, hey, can I talk to you? And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, can I like Instagram talk to you? Like, look, man, like, I, going through a divorce, or I'm having this issue, or I'm looking for a lawyer. And I'm like, yeah, man, just being able to encourage men. And I could, like I said, encouraging men, not even just that look like me, just men in general who are like, hey, man, like, I appreciate the content and like this post because I really felt that way. And like the way you explained it, like, I didn't think anybody else thought that way. Like, I appreciated that. So yeah, man, I'm all about, supporting all men, and specifically in my community, encouraging Black men to be fathers regardless, and really, really pushing therapy, really pushing therapy.
So it's Black Men Help. Is it .com or is it a
Black Men? You could find it on Instagram. Black Men.
Instagram.
Sorry, Black Men Heal. Yeah,
Black Men
there's
Heal.
it's
Okay, Black Men Heal.
it's great weekly Zoom classes. Love it right now because we got there's a couple Latino brothers in there. I refer to everybody as brother. Like, there's there's a couple Latino brothers in there. We got 2 real cool white brothers in there who, they just like, one finally started speaking. For the most part, he's like, no, man, I'm just sitting back. And finally, he came forward, and, they were like, well, what brought you here? And we all kind of laughed because he said, well, my wife is Black, and she told me, I need to be around, get engaged, with like some Black men who were in her family. And he was a veteran, and, he didn't like the way the VA's process was going. And he was like, look, man, being in this group with y'all has like really been helpful. Because like, you guys are talking about issues where, not even, from me, it's like a white guy, I fully understand, but like, just me, it's like being a man, like I dig it. So yeah, man, yeah. I'm all about that therapy game, man. Okay. I'm all about it.
Black Men Heal. I love it. So I'm gonna, I'm definitely gonna go find and start following and supporting that as well, because I want to help all men of all colors.
Absolutely, man.
Heal and have tools, have support. As a mental health professional myself, it's like, yeah, I want to help all men. I mean, that's my heart. Part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is to help men. Just race, ethnicity, creed, doesn't matter. It's like, no, I'm here that we're all men and fathers trying to grow and kind of normalize mental health, normalize
that
asking
part
for help
right there.
Right.
The normalization of the mental health that so many of us ignore.
Yeah. So let's actually transition now to that for the second half of this, would be to maybe talk a little bit about maybe your mental health journey, and you mentioned divorce and how'd you navigate that, and you kind of dropped to have done therapy, and the benefit of that and how it shaped you, and then maybe even speaking to, again, that mental health, like within the African American community, what is the temperature, so to speak, of mental health still? Gotcha. It's still a stigma.
I think for me, part of my mental health journey began like even before I really understood it. Even having like that good solid household, still, I had an issue with my fist, to put it nicely, where I ended up going to a couple of elementary schools, a couple of junior high schools, and a couple of high schools until, like it, righted the ship around my junior year of high school, which was the first, outside of kindergarten, my junior year of high school was the first year of school where I was not suspended for fighting, inciting a riot, or anything crazy. So it was just like 11 years of tomfoolery and just unnecessary fisticuffs. But for me, in the 4th grade, I took a test, and the test showed, I had like a high aptitude for English and speaking and sciences, and they wanted me to skip a grade. This was at the beginning of the 4th grade. I didn't skip a grade. My mother said, socially, he needs to be here because he's not mature enough socially to skip a grade.
Like most boys.
Exactly. Like, she was like, oh, I know he's smart, but he's no, we're not putting him up there.
Yeah,
but
he needs to mature.
Yeah, he needs some time to season. But what ended up happening was less than 2 months later, in that same 4th grade year, I had a teacher, for now that I know a lot of like psychs and doctors, I had a teacher diagnose me as having anger issues. And at the time it was still ADD. It wasn't quite ADHD yet. And she was like, he won't sit down. He won't relax. He won't do that. He won't listen. He's confrontational, which at times, if you're someone who's listening to this, you happen to be, like I said, one of Travis's 8,000 Black listeners, you've heard this before. He's aggressive. He's confrontational. He won't listen. He won't sit. So within a 2-month span, I went from being high aptitude, very intelligent, well-spoken. We should promote him, expedite his education because this kid's bored in class, to he's a nuisance. And I went from skipping a grade, and in less than 2 months, I was placed in a class with kids who were deemed to be remedial. And their reasoning was, well, he's doing this clearly because, and it was that's where it really started for me, where I understood the mental health journey. Because I said I wasn't remedial. I wasn't confrontational. I literally, you guys put in a report, I was bored. And that's where it started. So I look back at that when the first time I went to a counselor was with Merritt. And I sat in there and broke it all down. And, my spouse at the time said, none of this is my fault. And that was my two thoughts of counseling and therapy and medicine, were a marriage counselor who really didn't ask for accountability on either side, and me being in like the 4th grade and being deemed a nuisance. I was like, I'm not dealing with like these mental health or your medicines or any of that. And then after getting divorced, a relative was like, hey, look, man, go to therapy. You go see a counselor, go see somebody. And I said, no, man. And I brought up that history. He's someone who I never saw as someone who would attend therapy. He is not he's large, Marine, tatted. I've done all of this. And he said, look, man, things I had to do for love of country put me in a place where mentally I'm not the best at my times, and he was like, I'm man enough to admit it. You should go. And I went to therapy, and it was the greatest, manliest, toughest, most thug life gangster thing you could ever do, was to sit across the room from someone and have the guts to be vulnerable enough to be honest, to not have on a going. And it was it was real. And after that, I said, I need to really do this. Like I said, this is something like that I'm really going to follow up with. And it began there, and all of those negatives that I had, like coming out of, this marriage counselor was bad. And when I spoke to a school counselor and a mental health professional in the 4th grade, they labeled me as this, to fast forward at like 29 years old being like, man, why didn't more people tell me about this? Like, why were we not discussing this, when, we were going through high school, and you had people who, now that we've grown up, like people struggling with sexuality and drugs and, issues with their parents and sexual traumas. Like, why were we not pushing this? Why were we not telling people, hey, you could totally go talk to somebody? And now I'm in a position where now, in my mid-30s, I tell everybody, oh man, I'm not going to cry to somebody I don't know. No, bro, you listen, my dude, you really need to go do that. You for sure should go talk to somebody. And if you got to cry, man, go cry. If you've got to talk about some things that you feel like or make you feel less of a man, go do that, because you need the self-awareness. You need enough self-awareness. And I think, to transition to the Black community, I think that's our problem, because statistically, no one sees mental health professionals less than Black men. When they go through all these surveys and they randomly survey mental health professionals, because they survey my soon-to-be wife, they survey the old lady, and she's like, who do I see least? Black men who, even with respect to veterans, Mission 22, I love Mission 22 veterans a day commit suicide. Of those, the majority of them happen to be white men, but number 2 is Black men. And when they ask, well, did this do, they'll look at the history. All right, well, the white brother went for a couple of sessions. The Black ones just don't. We just don't, because there's this constant fear of, we don't even go to the doctor. So, like, if I don't go to a medical doctor, what makes you think I'm going to see a quote unquote shrink or quack? And there's just this stigma attached to, in our community, look, man, you're less than. Oh man, that's what women do. It's like, no, bro, like that's what we have. We got to stop that. We got to stop this. Well, no, that's what the women do. No, man, that's not what the women do. We need to do this for the sake. Like, I constantly tell people, heal so that your children don't just inherit your home, they also inherit your pain. They inherit your traumas. You've got to heal, because if you don't, like, speaking from firsthand experience, the things that you bottle up and keep inside, man, they will, if you don't think, you will push that down to your kids mentally, spiritually, and sadly at times physically. You're out of your mind. You're sadly mistaken. And in the Black community, it's frowned upon, because everything is, we the talking Black men heal. Perfect plug spot. About Stephen, great guy out of Los Angeles. Stephen was talking about, Stephen's a great LMFT. He was talking about imposter syndrome. To sum it up, he said, there's, and we all collectively, and even one of the white brothers in the group, he was the first one to speak up. He said, I see this. He said, I saw this every day in the military. And it's, specifically with Black men, as I said, I go back to fourth grade, being intelligent, high aptitude, to less than 2 months later, I'm aggressive, I don't listen, I'm a danger. And it's like, I know when I walk into some spaces, this is very, this like, I'm 6'1", 240. Like, I know some jujitsu and some boxing. I'm very menacing to some just off of appearance. So because of that, I have to adopt this face and this demeanor that's, even if I'm not really super hard guy, I got to be extremely soft for my safety and for the safety of those around me, and to make other people feel comfortable. And he spoke to that, and it was like, this is what it is. And there was someone in the group who said, I'd never heard of this. He said, well, you've never heard of imposter syndrome because you don't really talk to therapists. We listen to everyone in the neighborhood, and most of the time, I'm sure you've probably seen the movie Barbershop, for like, literally for some Black people, that's your therapist. And it's like, yeah, your barber's got good advice, but man, he's not going to be able to bust down those layers. And you've got to get comfortable. And I tell people regularly, man, we've got to normalize in the community being able to go out and talk to someone, being vulnerable, having the self-awareness that, look, man, today I'm not feeling good. All right, bro, it's okay to not be okay. That's cool, dog. Like, that's not a problem at all. But thank you for being real and honest enough with yourself to say, yo, I really need help. That in my community is the first step. Dudes having enough in them to be like, I need the help.
You sharing that, I'm sorry that such a young kid, it's so sad, as a 10-year-old, just having this label and how that affected you for quite some time, and then having a marriage therapist who was not so great. I'm surprised that you decided to try a third time. Like, why? I mean, at that point, I'm like, why would you try? Like, if you already had two pretty significantly not so great experiences, and then you went like that, that's like a huge risk of like, okay, well, I'm going to have a third awesome experience, but you went. Yeah. So what was it that kind of pushed you to try it again? I mean, because that's like, those are typically, we go based off of past of like, well, I'm not going to try this. This is not helpful or dangerous. So why would I even do that?
There was a day where I spoke to that relative who said, you should really do therapy. You should really do therapy. And I can remember telling my former spouse, because there were certain, when I talked about, people like I've seen firsthand, I would see in her at times prior, like, generational issues where I'm like, this has to stop with you. Like, for me, I'd said I was a third generation stepfather. My birth dad was raised by his stepfather because his father left him, and then my dad left me. So I said, okay, I'm not going to do that. Even multiple states away, divorced from the mother, I'm always going to be there. I'm always going to call. It's the birthdays is going to be that, because I'm not going to continue this trend. So in her, I'd seen like, man, like, yo, there's some things like, even just in conversation, hey, look, I know you don't want to hear this from me of all people, but it's some things like you might really like want to heal and work on. And she said something on this phone call. And after I got off the phone, I was like, and I thought about it. And I said, this is probably the moment where my birth dad decided, yeah, I'm out. Like, I'm out. And I sat there and I said, this is the moment that that he decided he was out. I don't want to be out. I'm going to go talk to this professional. Like, it was from hearing from someone else, from hearing something I didn't like from her. And then once again, having that self-awareness of like, okay, this is probably the moment where things went bad in my generation, in the men with this name. I'm the third of this name. And I'm like, this name carries, I had someone in the family tell me, that name carries somewhat of a curse for fathers. And all of that hit me. And I said, what have I got to lose? Like, let me go ahead and try this therapy thing. The worst that could happen is I go 0 for 3. And the best thing that could happen, is I actually gained something from it. And I thank
Wow.
God to this day that I went and I gained something from it.
Wow. That's a big step. I mean, you're in that space of making the connections of your biological, father. Like, this is where he was out, right? And I don't want to replicate this. And so that sounds like that was
Right.
enough to say, I
Right.
want to do something different, and this is why I'm willing to risk this again. And you mentioned the other barrier, the barrier of just within, the community of like, essentially it's like weakness, right? It's, you don't talk about your feelings. This is not something you do. Is there any other like significant barriers you would say within, specifically the African American community that would say we don't go to mental health because of, here's like one or two other things as to why that you hear in the conversation that you experience that you would say, hey, these things are definitely barriers that we need to get rid of to help men come in? Is there anything like that?
I mean, I think the primary, the one with respect to, not going because, it's not manly. That's always there. That's in every community. I'm sure, people
that was in my community too.
That's just a man thing, a man thing in general. That's not black, white, green, purple. Right. That's a man thing. You don't talk about your feelings.
I've done tons of men's groups, and that's with African American men, Latino men, Asian men, white guys, and
nobody does feelings.
That's the classic theme among men that unites men. Is like, we don't do feelings. It's weakness. It's a whole other a lot of other slurs that have been used on sports fields. Start to the P or some other words.
Some other insert expletives. I think the number one, I think number two is fear. Like how we just said across the board, it's all men. I think in the black community, outside of, it being weak, number two, it's the fear of, am I less than? Are people going to think I'm less than a man? Am I going to look like one of those, expletives, or words that gets used to describe men? Is it going to be that? It's, I'm afraid. I think it works fear both ways. Is it going to be, I'm afraid of the judgment of the people, of if I go? And then it's the other side. Is it, I'm afraid that this might work. Like, what if, then it clicks to, what if this is wrong? And I think that connects to the number one issue in the black community with respect to mental health, which is the same thing with just, like I said, black men don't even go to the doctor. That's why we lead in prostate cancer. That's why at times our women lead with like breast cancer deaths. My mother just beat ovarian cancer. We're like number two with our women ovarian cancer because we don't go to the doctor. And part of it is it's not learned. Like in our community, there was, you get the old school folk who, well, I don't go to the doctor, you'll do this. The old Chris Rock joke, we didn't go to the doctor. We just put some tussin on it. And people hear that and they laugh. And I'm like, no, man, in the community, there are people who really shy away from the doctor. There's, I always tell people very quickly, there's African Americans haven't had the best history with medicine in America. So at times we're a bit apprehensive. And that goes from being, it's something your grandfather didn't go to the doctor and he died of prostate cancer. So now your dad knows your grandfather didn't go to the doctor and died of prostate cancer. But then instead of him having the self-awareness to go, man, my old man died of that at 40. I should go get it checked out. He goes, well, it's that other side of fear. What if I do got it? If I don't go, I never know I got it. Okay, yeah, bro. And then you die at 40. So it's the same way with mental health. We go, hey, look, man, I have sexual trauma. I was physically abused. I was mentally abused. I grew up in a household where I witnessed my mother beaten or my father assaulted or people do drugs. And there's all of this trauma and we know it's there. And we walk around in our community and we just go, don't talk about that. If you do, hey, just talk to this person. Or there's, I believe the other thing where a lot of, black people go, well, it's as someone who's a faith believer, this is not an attack, but we have folk who go, well, you could just pray about it. And it's like, yeah, but. And I believe like our community more than any other is the mindset is, well, you could just pray. And I can't think of her name, but there's a young lady who I follow on Instagram and she tells people, you can have Jesus and a counselor. Like you can pray and have a therapist. And it's like you can have that duality. But I think far too often black people operate as a monolith, specifically black men. You've got to be tough. You got to be rugged. You got to be a man. Got to be a fire. Got to be a leader. Can't show no weakness. Can't cry. Can't do therapy. Can't do that. Keep it bottled inside. And like I said in the episode, I was in the episode I just recorded. Man, that has nothing to do with your family. That has nothing to do with your faith. That has nothing to do with your community. Everything to do with ego. It has everything to do with you wanting to be in charge, you wanting to self-diagnose, you wanting to figure it out, even knowing that the outcome is going to be bad.
Yeah.
You still do it. And in our community, far too many men, because they don't know, they don't have the knowledge. It's been passed down. Don't do, don't do, don't do. Even though now a simple Google search will get you where you need to go, they still go, it's like, man, you got to put that ego away, bro. Like you're causing far too much problems. Like you should really go see a therapist. But that idea being brought up brings up all those things. Less than a man. I'm afraid. Well, what's therapy? And it's like in today's age, look, man, Google, Bing, Yahoo search, you could go to BetterHelp, you go to Headspace. There's so many options and avenues for you to go to that there's no reason why at this point as 27, 43, 55-year-old men, we should still be within our community moving around as if the tools aren't available, as if the knowledge isn't there. Because in this day and age of technology, everything is in our faces. We know it's there, but like I said, something in you has got to say it stops with me. Like I told you, like there was that day where I decided, I said, absentee fatherism, abandonment, feelings of less than, feelings of inadequacy. Nah, that stops with me. Like, yeah, we're done with that. We end that here. And more men have to decide, like, that's really what it is. It's out in the community, but more men have to decide, I'm not going to be blind to it. I'm not going to keep ignoring the fact that I need to see it. I'm going to get the guts and just say, hey, look, I don't really care what y'all say. I'm a book a session with Travis because I think I really need this. Like that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, and it's more of a curiosity question, and I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to ask it. You said, in the past, our fathers or grandfathers didn't have the greatest experience with medical professionals, doctors, and back then mental health still was kind of a new, 40 years ago, mental health was still
fresh.
Around, but
right.
It was still fresh, but the stigma was even worse, even within the white community. Really, most communities, it was kind of like, oh, something's off, right? It's kind of like everyone has a stink eye. Even to this day, the stigma is better, but it's still kind of, people still feel it. But you mentioned something specifically that fathers didn't have within your community, good relationship with medical professionals. So is that
right? So
that comes from where, I guess?
I think there's, with the whole, not even to give like a whole Black history lesson, but just Black people in America, for the most part, have just, I won't say the words because I don't want like this to get flagged, but we'll refer to it as the poke. Even like with respect to the Pope, I think there are a lot of people who, generation wise, they look back and they cite, your Tuskegees, your Henrietta Lacks, and even going all the way back to just like American medical history and its relationship with Black people hasn't been the best. So I think because that gets passed down more than your grandfather who suffered from, before it was PTSD, shell shock. That gets passed down more than your grandfather who had shell shock, who in his mid-40s decided, I'm going to see a counselor. No one passes down that story. No one passes down the fact that, hey, Big Mama's second husband had diabetes. He went and saw a doctor to correct his diet. Those stories don't get passed down. It's almost like the media. We pass down the traumatic stories, and along with the traumatic stories attached to them comes the trauma. Instead of, hey, can you pass down the story of how the uncle who was suffering from PTSD reached out to the VA and they got them the help that he needed? Like, we don't want to pass that down. So it all boils down to, as my grandfather used to say, it boils down to want to. Do you want to? Hey, look, I know there's all this bad history with America and Black folk and mental health and medical health, but man, do you want the healing or not? Do you want the help or not? If you don't, by all means, keep running with ego. Keep doing it the way you're doing it. It's going to keep hitting your head, and it's not going to get better, and it's going to continue to be detrimental to your family. And the best way I could wrap that up is I tell folk, if the decisions you make with your mental health now, the poor decisions, are going to affect you for 3 or 4 generations, whether you believe it or not. The mental health decisions you make in the correct way are going to bless your family for the next 3 or 4 generations. When people start viewing mental health and mental wellness that way, hey, look, this isn't just for me. Every time I've gone to a therapy session or I sit in or I reach out and I'm on Headspace or whatever it is, when I need to tap in or I text my counselor, I'm doing it for me. And then after I'm done, I'm like, man, me getting this out and understanding so that this doesn't get passed down, this is going to help my children's children's children when I'm gone for 150 years. Somewhere down the line, I'll realize like I could look down and be like, that stopped with me. But it comes down to want to.
Yeah. Well, it's want to, and I think what I'm hearing, and you tell me, it's definitely a want to, and it's also going against a really strong internal narrative.
Exactly.
From real experiences, real traumas, dealing with the medical community, African Americans and American history, and also changing. What I'm also hearing is like really ignoring the positive, focusing on the traumas, which is real. Like those things, it's not like those didn't happen. They're true, which is unfortunate and horrible. I mean, any of that, it always sickens my stomach to hear this stuff, but it's the reality. But then also I think the biggest thing is like your voice within the community that you can speak to is we need to also change the narrative for the good and get those stories out, like spread that word. So then my kids, the next generation, hear that narrative of, hey, this actually this is a good thing. Obviously you have to find the right counselor. And I say that for people I see, I'm like, hey, if I'm not a good fit for you, that's okay. You need to find someone that you're going to connect with that you can trust. So you tell me, and I do not take offense, and I'll help you find someone if I'm not the guy for you. And it's like that with you getting your story out there to say, hey guys, within our community, we need help and there is help and it is good. And you got to find the right person. Obviously don't go to, there's certain people, I'm going to say it, there's certain therapists that probably shouldn't be therapists. They should, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Insert emoji.
Emoji.
Yeah, there's
And I'm not to my horn. I say to people, hey, I'm an average therapist. I am not the greatest gift to mankind, and I would say I'm not the worst. I kind of know that I'm average, which is good. It's good.
Yeah.
And I think the thing I was going back to is that narrative of changing, of sharing those stories of the positive changes of here's what it did for me. Here, like that uncle, like that friend, of like that's helped you decide I'm going to try a third time. Was okay, obviously something's clicking in me. I don't want to replicate the same stuff that happened to me for my dad and his dad, and I want to change. And someone that you knew was able to speak, hey, go, and you trusted that and took the risk, and now this is where you are. So not to put you on the spot, but what is like the one thing or two things that from your personal, you don't have to go into, you could share as much as little as you want, but what is like one or two things that you're taking away from your therapy experience that has been life-changing?
The biggest thing that I got out of therapy, the biggest was, like I said, I went to therapy after divorce. And for anyone who's listening who's been divorced, like you have all the questions. I'd gotten divorced and I had all the feelings. I'd failed as a husband. I'd failed as a father. I was a bad person. I was less than all of the things that I'd bottled up. Am I stupid? Am I a waste? I'm repeating generational curses. All those things from like the prior 29, 30 years came up. And one of the things my therapist said was, why do you feel this way? I said, oh, well, there's just this. And she said, that feeling of inadequacy you're having, like, do you feel like you're a bad father? Well, I got divorced. She was like, but are you really? She was like, were you really a bad husband, or were you just two people who in the end, it took you guys a while to realize you really weren't compatible? Okay. And after like the first session, I was like, here I was like really sweating, being inadequate. Like, man, I'm not enough. And after that first session, I started asking myself the opposite questions, like, why do I not think I'm enough? And then, from that, by the third, fourth session, I was like, man, I'm really that dude. Like, man, I'm a catch. I'm the father of the year out this thing. Like, why was I ever questioning me? And I think that was the biggest thing I got out of it, because I'd always question, specifically coming out of divorce, the, verbal abuse I'd endured in my marriage and things like that. Like, man, am I really less than? And then realizing like, no, it wasn't. Like, you just were in a very bad space where you allowed, like, this became the narrative around you. So, and you accepted it because you were mentally in a bad space. So the things that people said that you totally disagreed with, you just accepted. You just took it on to be like, well, I guess this is true. And after therapy, I was like, no, man, it's not that at all. And that's the biggest thing I got out of it, which I tell folk man, please go see someone. You've got to make the step. You got to go see someone. You have to.
Yeah, I think what I heard you say, the narrative shifted. For your internal narrative went from I'm inadequate, right? I think that's what you said.
Right.
It's a shame-based message, right?
Right.
Shame, quick education for people don't know. Guilt and shame difference. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad, right? It's that, I failed. I'm a failure, right? Shame is that self-prescription of some negative slant. So I'm inadequate. Not that maybe I did some things that were inadequate, some of my behaviors, but I as a person. And what I'm hearing, the big shift for you is that shame narrative shifting from that negative shame, I'm inadequate, I'm not enough, I'm a failure, I'm, fill in the blank, to no, I'm not that, I am enough, I'm not a failure, I'm not inadequate. I may have made some choices that weren't the best, and then that hits you of like, okay, I have now confidence to see me more clearly with a more accurate image of myself. And that really shifted everything for you. That's what I'm hearing is what's the clicker for you, is that shame narrative shifted from shame to truth, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Shame is a strong thing, my friend.
It is
classic one.
It is a powerful enemy.
Yes.
It's a powerful enemy.
We all struggle with it, man. That was, not to get too open, but my net message I battled with in my 20s and even teens was I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. That was in the back of my head. And I did my own therapy before I became a therapist and really wrestled with that narrative and realized, oh, I am enough. I have to look at my choices and take responsibility and change some of my behaviors, but it doesn't mean that I'm not enough. It doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It doesn't mean I'm not inadequate. And once I began to shift that shifted my whole life too and how I saw myself. Right. So it's something that we all wrestle with, even therapist people. So just letting you know, we all wrestle, we all have to grow, no matter what's behind your name. When, just because I have an LMFT after my name doesn't mean I don't have struggles. I just may have the tools. And to close us up, I guess I'm wondering if you could speak to, men, and maybe African-American men or whoever you're picturing, would you want to encourage them to change that narrative that we just kind of talked about, that kind of downstream narrative of either fatherhood or mental health? Like, this is what I want my community to know, and maybe not even that, my kids to know. Like, this is what I want. Like you said, I want to give, you're doing this, yes, for you, but
for
more
the generations
so for
to come. Yeah.
The legacy, the generations to come of the, the Augusta line of, this is what I want different in my family chain for the better. So what would you say to them? And let's do that. Your kids, what would you want them to know?
For my children, for any father, for anyone listening, I would say look back at your own, look at your dad. Look at all of his flaws. Don't look at the good moments. Look at the bad moments. Look at the times where he missed the mark. Look at the times where he was short. Understand all the effort he put behind that, but also understand those pains and everything that he had. Anytime you saw him hurt, anytime you saw him down, think of all those moments and put yourself there and say, if my dad never went to get help, if my dad never went to get assistance, think of all those things he carried, and now think of how it affected you. If you're a father, realize right now, bro, it stops with you. It can stop with you. The legacy of mental wellness begins with you. The generational curse of whatever trauma, it stops with you. The new day starts with you. For my children, you're the second generation of a legacy of people who are going to be of sound mind. This is going to be generations and generations to come of blessed, courteous, knowledgeable, mentally well people, because we refuse to fulfill the pages of a book that are narratives of people that look like us. It can stop with you today, but you have to choose to start something different. Dare to be different. You don't have to worry about judgment. You don't have to worry about what anybody says. You don't have to worry about what the family has always done. What they've always done has put you in a position to where you question who you are every day. you put on a mask and a costume every day to be able to move about the world comfortably because you're uncomfortable who you really are. All of that could stop with you, and you could begin something totally different, something totally new, so that 3 generations from now, when you're gone, the stories that are passed down is that you were the change. And for my kids will look up one day and they'll say, you know, our dad was divorced and there was this, and somehow he worked through it. And after a while, my mom worked through it, and we're better today because of the decisions that he made 70, 80, 120, 300 years ago.
Yeah. I'm going to listen to this multiple times over and over, Augusta, to hear that, because yeah, that's powerful. And that your kids, I guarantee you have felt that, because I feel it as you're talking, even though we're virtual. I'm sensing that kind of passion, that heart to heal, to grow, to pass that along. Here's the last question. You don't have to answer it. So within that community, African-American community, that mental health, is there something like someone like myself who looks like me? And if you're not listening, I'd be considered white, for lack of a better word. White.
Travis just used finger quotes, air quotes. If you don't see this
white.
Visually,
white. Part of my heart for too is to bridge racial, ethnic, age gaps too within this conversation of fathers and within mental health and men. And if you could speak to that, like, oh, this would help our community, or this would help with understand anything that you would say with someone like myself,
right,
to might help with that narrative, to help heal, to help whatever we might need to do.
I think you're already doing the first step as being someone who's, I think people, not saying that I don't like the term ally, because people were just like, oh, they do the 2 things, they go ally, or they say, invited to the cookout. And I always go like, what? I'm like, what? I was like, I don't understand like what y'all mean by this. But I would say you're already doing the first step of the work, because the work you're doing is for everyone. And like, I've seen comments, and like, I've told you a multitude of times, like, man, you're doing a great work. And I'm like, I'll share it. And, I'll have like, black brothers who I'm like, hey, who is that? I'm like, oh yeah, man, it's cool. White boy Travis out of California, man. He's doing a great work, bro. Like, yeah, man, I watched one of his videos. Like, it was powerful. So I think you're already in the first step of being like open to wanting, like, and putting it out there. But I think there's, for anyone who, who's not black and, in the mental health space, if you really want to help, I always tell people, it's, if you're a therapist, be, as you said, not everyone should be really available to listen and open to listening. You may never understand the black experience, but just being able to just sit back and listen. Like I said in the beginning, I'll ask people, how many black married couples do you know? Leave your comfort zone, go somewhere different, engage, see it, smell it, live it for a day, and sit back, and it'll give you the understanding. Be open to the experience and seeing it, because I think once you see it outside of television, whatever news outlet or political party you subscribe to, once you really see it firsthand, something in your head goes, I understand this differently. So then when you want to help, when you want to say, hey, look, man, I noticed this, and this is an issue in your community. Man, I'm just here to listen, bro. Anything, just being available and open, that goes as a black man, to hear somebody be like, hey, look, bro, I just want to listen. I tell people that goes further than you would understand.
I appreciate your kind words for me, and good to know that that's kind of a big step for not only myself, but anyone else listening who may look like me or doesn't understand, the African American experience, because it's different in Asian Americans, Latino Americans. I mean,
exactly.
It's different, and there's definitely some themes and trends among, but to actually listen, to be heard, right, to without judgment, but just to try to really understand and to create. And the other thing I heard is creating relationship out of your comfort zone, but creating authentic, real relationship with other people that don't look like you, and to try to understand their experience. And of course, I'll never fully I can't, it's impossible to fully understand. Right. And I know that as a therapist, there's plenty of things I'll never understand sitting across the table when people share some of the sickest stuff you could even imagine.
Yeah.
I can't fully relate, but I could sit in the pain and listen and try to just meet them where they're at. And know that that's kind of one way that someone like myself can actually help heal. And for any other guy, white guy, whatnot, listening who doesn't understand this experience, like that's a good starting point for all of us to help bring healing to all of us. And so I guess I appreciate that, just that directness, that wisdom, that advice, that kind of tool, that very like tangible, hey, start here and then go here. Because then now we could do something with it. And now we can actually begin to heal, and knowing that that's kind of has, like you said, a bigger impact than you would know. So I appreciate that. And that's something that I want to continue to do, and grow in and understand and heal. And if I can help even a small part bring healing, that is my heart, my mission, men and mental health and fathers, and from all ethnic, cultural, and creed, and trying to understand those nuances and how I can help listen, understand if I can step in and bring healing, whatever it might look like. And it looks different depending on the person, right? Depending on their circumstance. Some things I can speak directly to, some things no. My job is to listen and just to witness and to create and develop relationship. It just depends. And I thank you for this conversation. We're coming on an hour and a half, so we're gonna. Yeah. I have a feeling I really mean this. I think we're gonna have some more episodes together until we could talk more specifically. But I've appreciated this conversation, Augusta.
Oh man, brother, listen, Trey, I thank you, man, for allowing me on the platform. Like I said, man, the first time like I saw it, I was like, oh man, what's this brother doing? And then I looked and I said, man, I said, this brother's doing like a great work. I said, man, if I ever get an opportunity to go in there, I enjoyed the Jay episode, with his perspective. And I'm like, I said, this dude is doing like a great work. He's giving different cultures, countries, and I'm like, and he's taking men from these different backgrounds. And because it's men, I'm like, and it's fathers, I'm like, this dude is taking a multitude of fathers and giving them the space to be like, we're going to talk about this dad life, and we're going to talk about this mental health, because God dug it, folk don't do it enough. And I said, man, that's an awesome space, man.
Thanks, man. And Jay, yeah, that was a powerful. I mean, that was the one just released. Yeah. It just blew me away hearing his story. And I always know a little bit about someone's story when I first get to know them, but I don't hear everything until we start doing the interview, and I get all of it. I'm just like, man, I'm blown away by the decisions he made in the end, and what he decided to do, given how that story unfolded and the lies. I'm like, there was a lot of just so much stuff.
There's a lot to unpack.
And I didn't even get to unpack it all. And again, I'm not his therapist, so I'm not going to unpack that all on a show, because that's not helpful or healthy. Right. But I have my respect.
Yeah, the utmost.
Okay, the utmost respect for Jay Skibbins, and we're plugging another guy, but Jay Skibbins, he's a parent, coach, single dad, and he just released. And so I appreciate man. You should reach out, if you haven't, reach out to him and just tell him what it meant. And I know he'd appreciate that. And, at Jay Skibbins. And could you plug again, Black Men Heal?
So I'm at Augusta C. Foster. There's the link tree, all of that on Instagram. Yeah. The Twitter is also attached. I believe. Perfect. The current book, The Divorced Dad Reset, is out. It's short ebook, just basically quick basic tools that you need for understanding and progressing and getting out of the fog of divorce. Black Men Heal. Please go follow Black Men Heal. It's awesome. Right now, they're on a 7-city live tour, which is dope. Wow. I'll be taking part and assisting when it comes to Atlanta, where they're literally just posting up on like corners and parks and inviting dudes out. They're like, hey, look, you black, you white, you brown, you're whatever color, come out. We're just going to have these open talks and conversations live and in living color. Yeah, give them a follow. Every Sunday there's King's Corner. Man, it's awesome, man. If you're listening to this, if you've listened to however much of this Travis has put down, and whatever race you are, and you're sitting in the crib and you're like, yeah, man, I thought about going to therapy, and you don't go see a therapist or counselor after this, man, brother, you better get out the house and get that help. Go and heal so that your children don't have to.
Gosh, man, I love it. Heal so your children don't have to.
Heal so your children don't have to.
Yeah. There's a post by, I'm plugging another, Dear Fathers. I follow that account.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they just had that, I think, almost an identical quote of that
Yeah.
just, I think, yesterday or something.
Yeah, man, if I tell people, if you work on the healing now, I kid you not, your generations upon generations will thank you.
Dude, we're gonna end this episode on that note, because this is, I'm blown away by this. I love this conversation, and man, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day in beautiful Georgia. Hopefully the weather's turned out to be a good one.
Humidity is starting to crank up, man, but you enjoy you enjoy that lovely California, probably high 70s to mid 80s, sunny and perfect. You
Yes,
you
thank you.
enjoy. I shed a single tear in humidity.
All right. Well, blessings to you, man, and to your family. And we're going to definitely talk soon. So have a great day, Augusta.
Perfect.